What's up guys, welcome to another video, and today I'm going to be walking you guys through how you can actually have a form on your website and actually let people able to submit that form, and when they do, email going to go straight to your Gmail account. Well, before we start, there's a couple things that you need to have, or at least have a good understanding of how they work. First thing first is ExpressJS. If you haven't worked with ExpressJS before, this is going to be a totally nightmare for you. So I highly recommend at least you've tried to do at least one thing with Express. Second thing is you definitely need to have an understanding of Node.js, or at least done some work with it. Well, if you've done with these two, well, let's go ahead and move forward to the next step. So the next step is I have a very empty folder. As you guys can see, there's nothing inside of it. Pretty straightforward. First thing I'd like to do here is I'd like to initialize my package.json, and this command is going to go ahead and initialize my package.json for me. And again, I now have a package.json available for me here. Once I have this package.json, I'd like to go ahead and create a file called server.js. And inside that server.js, this is where I'm going actually to do most of the code that we need for this application to work. So once we have our server.js, last thing I'd like to do here is I'd like to go ahead and install a total of 3 packages. First one is something called Express, second is something called Node Mailer, and lastly it's something called Node Mailer .MailGun .transport, and save that one as a dependency. Once again, the -S here is saving these packages as a dependency. Alright, so once my packages are done, complete install, I'd like to go ahead and set up a couple of things. For this one, guys, I'm going to try to do everything that we're going to do in this session into 4 chunks of work, okay? The first chunk of work that I'd like to do is I'd like to kind of go ahead and configure my route, render some HTML. So I'm going to go a little bit fast, but I'll explain as I go along. I'll go ahead and explain the port Express here. Once I have Express module, I'm going to define an Express application, and I'm going to go ahead and have this port listen on a port. I do not have the port yet, so I'll go ahead and say, hey, I'd like this one to listen on port 8080, and I'm going to pass this port over here. We want a callback, so we'll generate our callback here. Now, a callback, we're going to have a curly bracket that technically go ahead and gonna console log that our server is starting on port 8080. So once I have my port, one thing I'd like to do, instead of having to do a lot of console log, I usually do this. Usually just go ahead and store this console log into a variable called log, and now if I want to refer to it, I technically just use the word log, and I can even go shorter and use my ES6 syntax just to kind of make this one a little bit fancy. So once I have my server starting, I'm going to go ahead and create one route. For now, I want to use the to-param, and on the home page, which means that whenever the user go to the home page, I'd like to send the user a file. And the file that I'd like to send the user, I want this file to be an HTML file. We do not have that HTML file yet, so let's go ahead and create it. I'm going to create a folder called views, and inside my view, I'm going to go inside view folder and create a file called index.html. And again, ladies and gentlemen, if you see here, I now have a file called index.html. I'm going to leave it empty for now, and I'm just going to say welcome my app. Again, this is pretty basic, just to configure the first chunk of work. And if I go back, I want to send that HTML file into this route. So first I need to use a module, which is a built-in module, so I do not need to install that. I'm going to go ahead and bring this module here. It is something called path. So I'll go ahead and bring that path module, and here I'm going to do path.join. And once I do path.join, I'm going to use the current directory, and once I use that current directory, I'm going to go inside the view folder, and now I'm going to get this file called HTML. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, this is a way for me to configure that HTML file, and I'm going to go and run this file now. If I do nodemon, and my server is starting, and if I now go into port 8080, I should be able to get my application up and running. And ladies and gentlemen, this is the first chunk of work where I was able to technically get Express, initialize an Express application here, and then I use app.get to render route and get my port listening to on port 8080, and I just use the path to render my HTML, and this is just something extra to make it look nice. Once again, if you'd like to stop, please stop at certain chunks so that you can at least go back over and watch the video to make sure that you can follow along. So the second chunk of work that I'd like to do is I'd like to make sure that my HTML is at least sending data to my server in order for me to be able to get those data from my server and be ready to send those over my email. In order to do that, there's a couple things I'd like to do on my server side. First thing first, I need a data parsing, which means whenever those data are coming in, I want a way to be able to parse this data. In order for me to do that, I'm going to use express.url encoded, and inside of it, I'm going to use extended. I'm going to set this one to false by now, and I'm going to use the same thing, which means instead of URL encoded, and this time I'm just going to do JSON, and there you go. I got this 2 line here to configure my data parsing, which means whenever the HTML is going to be sending me data, then I'll be able to successfully get those data here. And we're going to call this one as our chunk 2 of work. Of course, there's more to do within that chunk 2 of work. All right, so the second thing I'd like to do is I'd like to create an app post, and app post is gonna be receiving data from our client over something called email. And here I'm gonna pass the request, and we got a couple to do here, but the main to do behind this is for this one to send the email, and we'll say send email here. But for now, we're not going to be able to send an email. We're just going to send a dummy response back to the client, something like message receive, for the client to be able to at least get that response back. Again, these 2 things so far is considered under our chunk 2 of work. We're not done yet. There's a couple of things we need to do, but just to kind of go over this is we configure our data parsing, which means whenever the client sends us some data, we're going to be able to process this data and be able to access them pretty easily. And here, this is where we're going to expect to receive some data from the client. But the question is, what is the client? Well, the client is technically our HTML for now. And here I'm going to set up a couple things. First thing I'd like to set up here, I'd like to go to this website and get jQuery CDN. I'm going to need jQuery for this, but feel free to do whatever you guys want to use. I'm just going to use jQuery to make my HTTP call. So copy this link and bring this one inside that HTML right here. And after that, I'm going to be adding an extra script. And ladies and gentlemen, I am ready to start coding my JavaScript here. On all of this again are considered under the chunk 2 of work. All right, so once I have that, I'm going to create a form here. So let's review what we have. We have a very basic form, nothing fancy, and I'm going to use something here. Please don't use it in a real world environment, but just be mindful. We want this one to be as basic as possible. We have an input here that is going to contain the subject, and we have an email, and then we have our text here where people can add a text, and then a submit button. What I'm going to do here, first I'm going to select the form. I'm going to say, hey, whenever we run an event on the form such as submit. So here's what we do again. Once we get the form that we have, and then we run a couple script, first thing that I do is I select the form, which means whenever the user submit this form, and that's the event that I'm listening for, I want to do one thing, disable the default browser behavior. And once I do that, I go ahead here and kind of technically grab the value of every single input that the user is going to type on. And now what I really need to do here is send those data to my server. And in order to do that, I'm going to use jQuery.post. And this post itself take a total of 3 parameters. All right, so once I have that data, I need to take that data and pass that data as my second parameter here inside the post. Now you might be wondering, okay, Sterling, what is then the first URL? Well, the first URL is wherever your server is actually waiting for that response. In this case, if I go back to my server.js, and here's the post where the server is actually waiting for that response over this route called /email. So what I really need to do here is go back to my HTML file and then pass this link here, which means that we are now going to send those data to that path so that our server can get those data and do whatever it needs to do with it. Again, this is very, very important for you to understand how posts work. And ladies and gentlemen, once I have this path where the server is waiting for and the data that I would like to pass to send for, and then I pass my callback. For this one, I'm just going to console log server receive our data. All right, ladies and gentlemen, once again, let's review this to make sure that everybody here is following along. We have a form, and after we got the form, we are listening to an event on that form, which means whenever the user click submit, then we're going to go disable the browser behavior. We're going to get every single value from that form, and we're getting one value at a time. this one, and this one. And after we get that, we store them into an object. And after we store them into an object, then we send that over to our server. All right, once again, this is still part of the second chunk of work. And once we get that over to our server, and inside our server now, all we need to do, we're not going to process the data. We're going to make sure that we can actually see those data that are coming in. And to access those data that are coming in, we're going to use the first parameter here, which is rec, and we're going to access them over something called body. So we'll do rec.body, and that should display the data that are coming in. And for now, we are sending a very basic message to the client. And ladies and gentlemen, we are now completed with our second chunk of work. So let's review it. We technically configure our data parsing, we configure our app.post, and then we go back to our client, we build our form, and after we build our form, then we run a couple JavaScript code to be able to send those data from our form to our server. And all we need to do now is for us to test this application. If I start my server and run it again, what should happen is whenever we submit a form, we should be able to see those data are actually coming in inside our terminal. If we do not see the data are coming in, that means that the second chunk of work didn't work as expectedly. Make sure that you guys rewatch the video over to make sure you get that working before you proceed to third chunk of work. All right, in order for me to do that, I need to go to the web to localhost 8080, and there is my data. I can open my console log, and once I do that, I'm gonna add a subject such as testing. I'm gonna add my email, and I'm gonna add a very basic message such as testing. And when I click this button, got server received, and if I go back to my server, I should be able to see those data coming in inside my terminal. If they're not coming in, once again, guys, double check, making sure that you are actually making sure you're getting everything as accurate as possible. All right, once we are completed with second chunk of work, the third chunk of work that we're going to do is we're going to stop our server and create a file called mail.js. Mail.js is going to be the file that contains every single things that we need in order for us to send our email. And for that one, remember the two packages that we installed earlier, such as Node Mailer and Node MailGun. Well, we're gonna bring those two packages inside our mail.js. And what we're going to do here is technically import those two packages because we're going to work with them. All right, so once I bring these two packages in again, one more time, guys, I just bring them into this file. And after that, I'm going to go ahead and configure the authentication for the MailGun that takes an object, and that object takes an API key. And that also object takes something called domain. So I'll go ahead and configure that. And I'm going to walk you guys to where you can actually get those information. And third thing, I'm going to configure my transporter. In order to configure my transporter, I need to bring Node Mailer here. And I'll do create transport, and then I'm gonna use the Node Mailer MailGun transport, which is this one here. And I'm gonna call this function here and actually pass this authentication value here. So when I call this function, I need to pass this OAuth here as a parameter. Once I do that, I'm gonna go here and configure my mail options. My mail option should be containing this for property here, which means where is this email coming from? So I'd like to say, hey, this email is coming from this gmail.account, and where is this email is going to? And let's say this email is going to Delta Maverick, which is the email that I'm going to have for whenever people submit or send an email, so that I can instantly receive this email that they submit. And the subject could be anything. For now, we're gonna leave it testing. And this one the text is gonna be the body of the email. Let's say I would like to get in touch with you. All right, ladies and gentlemen, once again, we configure our mail option. The only thing that we need to do now is grab this transporter, and we're gonna do send mail, and we're gonna pass the mail option, which is this entire mail option, to here. And also we're gonna pass it a callback, and this callback gonna take an error. We're gonna check and see if there's an error. And if there's not an error, all right, ladies and gentlemen, this is our typical configuration for our email. And one last thing that we're gonna need to do is where can we find those information? Remember, we need them in order to send the email. Well, in order to find this information, I need to go wherever I have MailGun. And once I have MailGun, make sure you do sign up for an account. If you do not have one, click the sign up button. For me, I already have one, so I'm gonna go and click the login button. All right, so once you have the login button, I'm gonna go all the way down here and I'm gonna get a couple information. The first one I'm gonna get is the domain name here. So I'm gonna copy this domain name and go here and paste this domain name here. And second, if I go here, you can see the key. Now be mindful you're not getting the public key. The key that you actually want is the private API key. So this is the key that you want. So I'm gonna go ahead and replace this key here. So once you have the domain and plus the key, the configuration for your OAuth should be working and everything should be working as expected. All right, in order to test this one, there's one last thing that we need to do. Wherever you have the mail option and whenever you're sending this email to whichever people that you're sending it to, you need to go over MailGun again and all the way down wherever you see authorized recipient. And you need to make sure that the email that you are sending the email to, which is going to be your email because you're going to be the one receiving those email. For my case, it is something called Delta Maverick. So make sure that you add them as a receiving recipient. And once you add them, you need to verify them. And what that means is they will send you an email. And there you go. Here's the email. Once you clicked on it, make sure that you click agree to accept to be a recipient. Once I click agree, and then if I go back to the MailGun account, I should now see my account verified. Now, this is very, very important. If you are not added as an authorized recipient, you will not be able to receive email using the Sandbox account. Once again, this is very, very important. You need to find a way to make sure that this email is validating under the authorized section. Now, this is going to be considered as chunk 3 of work. One more time, guys, you can make sure that everything is working as expected. And if I run this one, that should be able to send an email for me. And there you go, guys, message successfully sent. And if I go to my email, I should be able to see the new email coming in. Ladies and gentlemen, believe it or not, we are now completed with third chunk of work. So let's review before we integrate the last chunk of work. Once again, we are one step away to complete, okay? We successfully configured our server, which is the first chunk of work we've done. We're able to get to render an HTML file and start our server. And once this was successful, this was the first chunk of work. Second chunk of work was more like adding this configuration, our data parsing, and adding the add post route. And if we go back inside the index HTML, we were successfully able to write every single code for it. And third chunk of work was inside of mail.js. And if you guys, again, we were successfully now able to send an email. In order to configure the fourth chunk of work, remember the data that are going to come from the user, which we already get access to. If we go over the server route, this is going to be where we access the data that are coming in from the user. Now, those data that are coming in, there's going to be a couple of things that are dynamic. Number one is going to be the subject. The subject could always be changing. And number 3 is the text. And the text is going to always be changing as well because the user will be typing in order to tell you something. And the other thing is the from, which means whoever user is sending you the email, their email is always going to be different. For example, one user can have a different email, another user can be having a different email. So the bottom line is that user email is going to be changed. And in order to get that, we use the word from to specify that this is going to be coming from this user. So what we can do is we can write a function called send mail. And what this send mail is going to do is it's going to take 3 parameters. The first one, email. Second one, subject, and last one is going to be the text. And all we need to do now is we're going to copy all these 2 code over here and move all of them inside of there. So once we have these 2 code inside of here, what we need to do is remember those 3 values are going to be our value that we're going to always expect whenever people call this function to pass those value. So we want to go ahead and replace those dynamic value where we had the hard-coded value, such as the email of the user. Instead of this hard-coded email that is coming from this user, we're going to pass it the email. Now this one is always going to be the same because this is where you want to receive the email that the user is going to send you. Second, I'd like to replace the subject with whatever subject the user would like to send me. And third, I'd like to also replace the text with whatever text the user would like to send me. Now, this is almost done, guys. I'm just going to refactor this a little bit because with ES6, we don't need to repeat ourselves like this. So lastly, the last thing I'd like to do, guys, which is very, very important, I'd like to add an extra parameter here. And this one's going to be considered as a callback. If this do not make sense for you guys, just forget it for now. But the bottom line is we're going to use this callback instead of console login. And the first value that we're going to pass down here is in case there's an error, we're going to pass an error. And the second one is in case that the data was successfully able to process. And here again, I'm going to call this CB again, and I'm going to pass null as there is no error. And here I'm going to pass the data here. Now, again, this might not sound confusing, but the bottom line is the reason I'm doing this is whoever is using my function can actually send us 3 parameters, and then they can have a callback, which gonna send over whichever error that we have for them to properly handle that error. So they can technically use our function like this in order for them to be able to utilize, access the error object after it's successfully finished, or either there is the data. Again, if this sounds confusing for you guys, just go ahead and do this for now, and you will technically be able to get this working. All right, so once I have that, now all I need to do is make sure that I can export this function. So I'll go ahead and export this function here. And once I export this function, remember, all of this are considered as the first chunk of work. And once I have that, I need to go back to my server. Well, I'm going to bring this code here, the function that I created, which calls sendMail. I'm going to bring that function here. And where is that function located? Well, it is located inside a file called mail.js. So I can do that mail.js. And once I do that, I can now feel free to use this function inside my app post wherever I'm actually getting the user data. And down here, I can go ahead and pass those user data here. Now, what I'm gonna do for simplicity's sake, of course, there might be further thing you might need to do, such as checking, making sure that the user will send you the right format. In this particular case, I'm gonna assume that the user will send me the right format. So I'm just gonna go ahead and use ES6. And what I'm gonna do here, I'm gonna go ahead and get those values here, such as the email, and I'm also gonna get the text. And now, if I go, and now if you guys remember, the 3 value that the user should send you should be the following. So I'll comment them here. So the first one should be email, and I'll go ahead, I'm gonna use my function here. So I'm gonna send my email, and second, the subject. So I'll send the subject here. And third, I'd like to send the text. The third one was actually our callback. And here again, we can now receive those error. In case there is an error, it's gonna give us that error message, and in case there is not an error, then it's gonna give us the data. So we can do the same check here just to check if there is an error. In this case, I want to set a status code of 500. I'm going to send a message here saying that we have an internal error. And else, which means that we were able to successfully get the data, I want to send them a message saying that email sent. And again, guys, this is just a way for us to know that the email was successfully sent, and we no longer need that line. And ladies and gentlemen, believe it or not, we should be now completed with all the steps that we need to be able to get that integrated. The only thing that we need to do now is making sure that this is working. Okay, so in order for me to check that, I'm gonna go ahead and run my server.js, and this time be mindful that we're not running the mail.js, we're running the server.js to make sure that this is working. And it sounds like it is listening. So let's go on port 8080. All right, our document is working. So let's put our title here. Let's say application, and we're going to put my email. So I put the email of the user that would like to be contacted, and I say, please read as soon as possible. And once I'm able to do that, I'm going to click the submit button. And it sounds like it was able to send the data from the server, which means the server received the message. And it sounds like I was able to get those data from our server. And let's see if our email actually sent. And ladies and gentlemen, there we go. This is the title of the application that we sent, which is the subject. And this is the message that we were able to send. And believe it or not, ladies and gentlemen, this is how we were able to successfully use a form to be able to send data straight to your Gmail account. All right, so let's review the chunk of work number 4 again. Chunk of work number 4, all it's doing is taking 3 param here and a callback. If there is an error in the call, it just send those error back for it to use it. And if the message is able to successfully retrieve, then it send those message back. And that's one of the reasons that we are now using this callback to check and see if there is an error or if the data actually receiving that. And based on whichever one comes in, then we are sending a message back to the client, and so on and stuff like that. And I hope you guys enjoyed. See you guys in the next video.